Today's daf we're going to be learning is Menachot, daf Kuf Hey. We're nearing the end of the Masechet. Reminder to register for your Zoom link for the Siyum. Siyum will take place Thursday evening Israel time, 8:30. We'll be finishing the last daf, which is meant to be Friday, so that means Thursday. You have Thursday's daf, and then we're going to learn together at the Siyum the last daf. Friday there will be no regular class. It's a good time to listen to the intro of Dr. Iyar at Hoffman-Lipson. And we'll be hearing at the Siyum also from Dr. Alana Steinhain, who we're familiar from Din and Daf. If you're not used to hearing from her, well, it's a pleasure to listen to her. She'll be giving us the overview, rolling in the dough, the basic messaging of Masechet Menachot. And we're going to hear from Hannah Hasson, who's one of our learners. We're going to hear insights from her about learning Masechet Menachot. With that, we will get started. So the quick review, just because I felt like it was a little bit complicated. I'm not sure I explained it clearly enough, so I want to just go back to the end of yesterday's daf, where we talked about this Mishnah. Also, we have a short daf, so it gives me a little time to review. The Mishnah had two cases where it talked about Perashti ve'eni yodea ma perashti. I said something, I'm not sure what I said. Okay, we had the case where, the first case, Yavi Shishim Yisaron, there's no machloket mentioned there. And then later in the Mishnah it says, Perashti min chashat esronim ve'eni yodea kama perashti. Then it said, I set aside a mincha of esronim, and I'm not sure what I stated. And then we said, you have to bring, right? The difference was you said mincha shel esronim, okay, which we weren't exactly sure what the difference was. Then the halacha is yavi shishim saron, but Rebbe says you actually have to bring 60 bowls, each one with a different amount from 1 to 60. So now we tried to figure out, because we basically understood that Rebbe holds, number one, that you can't put in one bowl and say some of it will go for a voluntary offering and for my obligatory offering from my vow, and the rest will go to whatever I vowed. He doesn't work like that. And he also thinks that the second case we understood as saying, Mincha shel esronim, I want it all in one bowl. Now, we had Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan who each tried to figure out, who does the Reisha of the Mishnah go like, the first case? So we had Chizkiah said it's not Rebbe, because Rebbe said you have to bring it in separate bowls, right? And you can't have any sort of one big amount. You can't put it all in one bowl and say, oh, well, I'll make this stipulation. So it can't possibly be Rebbe, because it just says bring 60 saron. We assume it means in one bowl, and that wouldn't work for Rebbe, because in the other one he says you have to bring separate bowls for each one, right, to make sure whichever one is the one you were supposed to bring, that is in its own bowl. But Rabbi Yochanan came and said, no, you could explain the first case as Rebbe, and basically what he ends up saying is, the case is not what we thought that you bring 60 saron in one bowl. It's you bring 60 esronim, each one divided into its own bowl. And it's actually not the rabbi's position. It's only Rebbe's position, according to this, or at least he's suggesting this, that you could explain it that way, that the first case is you didn't say they all have to be in one bowl. So great. We're not sure if you did 1 to 60. We can't mix, because that's Rebbe's approach. But we can put each isaron in a different bowl, and all together you'll get up to whatever amount you wanted in separate offerings, but who cares? It's as if they were together. It didn't need to be together. In the next case, you're going to need to do 1, and then 2 in one bowl, and 3 in one bowl, and 4 in one bowl, according to Rebbe, because you committed to put them all. I'm bringing a mincha of esronim, meaning I'm bringing a mincha in one bowl. And then we don't know what amount you said, you're going to have to try every possibility. Okay, those were the two different ways of understanding. Then the Mishnah went back to Rabbi Yehuda, the next line. Okay, the Gemara went back to the Mishnah, the line about Rabbi Yehuda. It's really going line by line, which it often does, but here it's very stark. Rabbi Yehuda says, Yavi minchat solet shehi miyuchedet b'menachot. Okay, if you said, I'm going to bring a mincha, Tanakama says, bring anyone you want. And Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you have to bring the solet one, because it's the best. Why is it the best? So we brought a bright that said, Ho'ilu patach ba katuv tchila. I'm starting now with the bottom of Kuf Daled Amud Bet, what we read yesterday. It's the pasuk, the first case it brought in Vayikra was that case, the solet. So they say, wait a minute, just because it's the first one doesn't really mean that that's the one you're supposed to bring, because look, here's a different example where we don't do that. If I say I'm going to bring an ola, Yavi ben bakar ho'ilu patach bo katuv tchila. The first case it brings in Sefer Vayikra, it says if someone offers to bring an ola, and then it says if it's a ben bakar. If you said cattle, does that mean you have to bring cattle? Or minatzon, if you said I said I committed to bring an olah from the sheep family, yavi keves, you have to bring a sheep. Why? Because the sheep family already includes goats and all that, but no, it says, in the pasuk, it says, im keves, im ez. So the goat is mentioned second, so the sheep is mentioned first, you have to bring the sheep. Mina of, if you bring it from a bird, yavi torim, because it says, if you want to bring a bird, either torim or b'nei yonah. So you should go with the torim. Right? So our theory that the Braita said would basically be in all these other cases as well. Now, we know it's not the case because why does it say in the Mishnah, which we're going to see further on in Daf Kuf Zayin, which we'll learn it better then, if you say I'm going to bring an olah, yavi keves, instead of bringing a ben bakar, which is the first thing mentioned, you bring a sheep. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah omer tor or ben yonah. If you say I'm bringing an olah, you can bring either a tor or a ben yonah, two different types of birds, but you don't, right, turtle doves or pigeons, but you don't, notice what's not listed here. V'lo palik Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda doesn't pipe in and say, oh no, you have to bring a ben bakar because that's what they started with. So now we're going to understand why did Rabbi Yehuda say this is the special one, Deleit Le'Shem Levi, because it doesn't have a name that goes with it. Meaning, doesn't have it's not called a minchat marcheshet, a minchat machvad, a minchat ma'afet tanur. Okay, it doesn't have a name. It's just minchat solet. Solet doesn't mean anything. They're all made of solet. I mean, solet means something. But it's just solet. It's just a basic mincha. So if you say, I'm going to bring a mincha, we assume you mean the basic mincha, the one that doesn't have any sort of name associated with it. Because if you had said a minchat machvat, you probably would have remembered that it was a minchat machvat. So now the Gemara says, okay, that sounds good. However, we had a Braita that said, the Braita said, so how can you just ignore that? It said, because that was the one listed first. So they say no. This is how you're going to read it. Hachi kamar. This is how it goes. What's the mincha miyuchedet b'menachot? Because it doesn't have any descriptor word. Okay, that's maybe a better way to say it than I said it before. It doesn't have a Shem Levi, a descriptor word. In other words, how do we know which one it is? Because it's the one that was mentioned first. Not because it was mentioned first. It just happens to be the one that's mentioned first. So we're saying, the Braita says, it's just identifying. It's saying, oh, it's the first one that's mentioned in the Torah. To which the Gemara says, Pshita, Mincha Solet Kamar. It's obvious from Rabbi Yehuda that it's the first one mentioned because Rabbi Yehuda says it's the Minchat Solet. He tells us already. Why do we need to identify it as the one brought first, right? Originally we thought that was the reason. Now we said that's not the reason, so it's just identifying it, but we already could identify it because he said it's a Minchat Solet. To which the Gemara said, Simana Ba'alma. The Gemara was just giving you the Braita was just giving you a mnemonic device to remember. How do you remember? Oh, you'll remember it's Solet, even though the real reason is because it doesn't have any descriptor, but because it's really just called Mincha. But you'll remember because it's the first one mentioned. If you remember that, you'll remember, oh, that's the one. Okay, so now, first of all, I just want to mention when I saw that word Siman Ba'alma, I started thinking to myself, how many times in the Gemara does that word appear, right? Or something like it's, there's Simanim, first of all, given in the Gemara. There's Asmachta Ba'alma, right? It's not really learned for the Pasuk. It's really, most people understand it as a mnemonic device. They just connect it to the Pasuk. Right? And it's very common. So I was thinking, in those days, they didn't have printing press. They didn't have other things. The way it was mostly oral. They mostly did things by memorizing. And then I started thinking, well, my daughter's learning for officers' course tests. She has all these tests. You have to memorize, who all the heads of the country were. Okay, that's not too bad. Then you have to remember all the Ramatkals, all the chief of staffs that were. And you have to remember all these things. And the kids come up with all these methods to do it. They have songs, they have all this stuff. So everyone's always looking for mnemonic devices to remember things as well as in the Gemara. So, and especially in those times when at most things were passed down orally. Now we're going to go back to the Mincha. To the Mishnah. That was a Freudian slip. Mincha, min ha-mincha. Okay, so now if you say the word mincha, or you say min ha-mincha, the type of mincha, yavi echad. So you bring, right, I said I was going to bring a type of mincha, so you bring one of the five. By Rav Papa. Rav Papa asks a question that we're going to try to answer but not be so successful. Mine mincha mahu. So if you say mina mincha, type of mincha, so we know you bring one. What if you say mine mincha? Now this is a confusing term. Mine means plural, types of mincha. So types is plural, but mincha is singular. So now the question is, what do we say? And here are the two possibilities. Kevan de amar mine, since you said plural, types of, tarte ka'amar, you said two. But then, umay mincha, so why was mincha in singular form? Well, it's a kula menachot nami mincha mikaryan. Like the word fish, for example. You could say fish, and it means one fish. It could also mean several fish. Likewise with the word mincha. The word mincha is sometimes used in the Torah to refer to multiple menachot. So maybe when you said minei mincha, you really meant minei menachot, you just called it a mincha. Really meaning, okay, so menachot nami mincha mikarya means sometimes menachot are called by the word mincha. Dichtiv, where do we see that? V'zot torat mincha. These are the rules for the mincha, but it's really talking about many menachot, all different kinds of menachot. Odilma, or perhaps, kevan darma mincha, maybe you say no. Mincha is in singular form. Chada mincha kamar, maybe it really means only one. Umay minei mincha, so why did you say minei in plural? Types of. Hachi kamar, mi minei mincha, chada mincha alai. From different types of minchas, I'm accepting one upon me. Okay? So we don't know. Is it one? Is it two? You have to bring two different types. The Gemara starts off with an attempt to answer. This again goes back to the whole thing of somebody made a vow, and not only do we not know what the person vowed, but the person doesn't remember what they said or what they meant. In this case, we know what they said. We don't know what they meant by it. And they don't remember. Tashma. Let's learn from here. We're going to have two attempts to answer the question. The first is from our Mishnah. The Mishnah says mincha. Min mincha, yavi achat, right? So if you say mincha or mina mincha, that was where we started today, right? Our quote here, sorry, not today, but right now. That was the quote from the Mishnah. Yavi achat, you bring one. What can you infer from that? Min ha mincha is one. If you add a plural form to that, ha mine mincha, from there you can infer, if you say mine mincha plural, shtayim, must be two. However, the Gemara says that all sounds good, but if you continue on in the Mishnah, it's clear that you can infer the opposite from the next part. Because they must seifa. Then it says menachot or min menachot. If you say menachot plural, or you say type of menachot, where type is singular, menachot is plural, yavishtayim. Then you bring two, which sounds like if you were to say ha mine mincha, but if you said mine mincha, then chada, you would only bring one. In other words, you can infer from the first part this case, and you can infer from the second part this case, and come to opposite conclusions. In which case, the Gemara says, okay, we can't infer from our Mishnah because our Mishnah doesn't really talk about this case, and any inference can go either way depending on which line you're inferring it from. This is a very common type of attempt where we say, oh, this part makes you think this, but that part makes you think that, because we're basically missing this case in the Mishnah, and either part of the Mishnah where we did here could come to a different, could lead you to a different conclusion. Tashma, second attempt. Min menachot alai. Now here's a braita where it says type of menachot plural alai. Yavi shtei menachot mimin echad. Okay, kind of like our Mishnah where it said min menachot. You bring two menachot from one type. Now here they say you can infer ha mimine mincha chada. Sounds like you can infer mine mincha would be only one. To which the Gemara says, why are you assuming it's one? You could actually infer the opposite because Dilma. Ha mine mincha maybe shtei menachot mishnei minim. As if you say min menachot alai, you bring two menachot from one type because min was singular. Mine, when you move plural to two types, then maybe you mean two types of mincha, right? Mine mincha, you would bring two menachot from two different types. So that really, right, could go either way. But the Gemara says, no, you can't do the second one. You can't say it's two because halotani hachi. Because doesn't it say later the following, in that same braita, Min menachot alai mevi shtei menachot mimin echad. Mine menachot alai, now here pay attention. Min menachot was really no different from our Mishnah. But it says mine menachot, if it does plural of both words. Okay? It says mevi shtei menachot mishnei minim. Now if you want to say that the inference from the first part, because it was singular, min menachot, you bring one, so, right, you bring two menachot from one type, then you would infer right? That you would bring from 2 different types, our case. But then, look at where it says. It says if you say plural of both words, you bring 2 from 2 different types, which would seem to imply hamine mincha chada. But if you only made one word plural, mine was plural, but mincha was still singular, it sounds like you wouldn't bring 2 from 2 different types. So that seems to be difficult. So it seems unlikely that this means 2. To which the Gemara says, no, don't question it from that. Because Dilma Hamane Rabbi Shimon, maybe you misunderstood that braita completely, or you did the wrong inference. Because you could say that braita is Rabbi Shimon, and from here on in today, we're going to be discussing Rabbi Shimon's position. Rabbi Shimon's position we already know. We learned it earlier in the Masechet. Ta'amar, Rabbi Shimon has a unique position that says, Mechza chalot u'mechza rikikim yavi. He says that you could bring, besides the 5 that we've discussed, solet, machvat, marcheshet, and the 2 ma'afet tanur, rikikim and chalot, you could also bring half rikikim, half chalot. So, you could say the following. When it says minei menachot, and it means shtei menachot mishnei minim, okay, minei menachot, so maybe, mine minei, now, what's the inference? But you wouldn't for minei mincha, because what? Mine minei mincha. Why? Because what does minei mincha mean, according to this braita? Now, the braita, again, never said minei mincha. But they did say minei menachot, and they didn't say minei mincha. Why didn't they say that? Because if I said minei mincha and I'm Rabbi Shimon, what would you have thought? Minei is 2 types, mincha is 1. So it's obvious. What would you think? Mincha di'ipe tre minei. Maybe minei mincha means specifically the one that Rabbi Shimon holds could bring half rikikim and half chalot. And then it's 1 mincha with 2 types. And therefore, according to Rabbi Shimon, the inference of that Mishnah would be minei menachot, bring 2 types from 2 different mincha offerings. But if you say minei mincha, you actually bring what you meant was the one that has chalot and rikikim together. Aval, but then, like Rabbi Shimon's position, in the end doesn't really interest us because we're really interested with the rabbis, which is the mainstream position. And then according to that, we go back to our question, what does minei mincha mean according to the rabbis? Aval rabbanan da'amrei mechza chalot u'mechza rikikim lo yavi. According to them, maybe you really would. Maybe shtei menachot mishnei minim. The minei mincha for the rabbis could be 2 types, 2 minchas. And the inference from that braita was only according to Rabbi Shimon. And it's just a suggestion. We don't really know, so we're left without really understanding what minei mincha would mean you would have to bring. Okay. The only thing that seems kind of clear is if you were Rabbi Shimon, or you held by Rabbi Shimon's position, it was probably kind of clear that you meant the mincha that has 2 different types in it, and then you're only bringing 1 mincha, like 5 rikikim and 5 chalot. Although today we're going to learn it doesn't have to be 5 and 5. It could be 1 and 9. Okay, we'll get there very soon. Now we're up to the next part of the Mishnah. Now I did say we're going to get to Rabbi Shimon, and this is going to lead us to Rabbi Shimon as well. Perashti ve'eni yodea ma perashti. So the next case in the Mishnah was I specified a type, but I don't remember which one. So obviously, what do you have to do? You have to bring all 5 types. Mantana, who does this go according to? We're going to have 2 answers here. The first is Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah says it's pretty obvious, based on what I just told you, that according to Rabbi Shimon, there's 6 types. So this must not hold by Rabbi Shimon, because Rabbi Shimon would say you have to bring 6. You have to bring, again, solet, machvat, flat pan, marcheshet, fried in the deep pan, the 2 ma'afet tanur, rikikim, and chalot. According to Rabbi Shimon, you'd have to bring also one that's half rikikim, half chalot. So Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah de look at Rabbi Shimon. De Rabbi Shimon, kevan Amar mechza chalot mechza rikikim yavi. And since he said you could bring that as 1 type, inami savar lak Rabbi Yehuda de Amar kol menachot ba'od eser. Now, even if he holds by Rabbi Yehuda, if you remember, there was a machloket, you have to bring 10 or 12 loaves. But even if you hold like Rabbi Yehuda, that's 10. Okay, we're going to say even Rabbi Yehuda is the minimalist. You don't need 12. We're still, this person who says, I'm going to bring a mincha according to Rabbi Shimon, we're going to see in a minute, has to bring 14 different minchas. Okay, where we get to 14, you're going to see in a minute. So even if he holds like Rabbi Yehuda, who has only 10 loaves each, now what does that have to do with Rabbi Yehuda? We're going to see right now. If you say, I'm going to bring a mincha, I don't remember, I specified a type, I don't remember which type, so you're going to have to bring solet, you're going to have to bring, 10 loaves, you're going to have to bring 10 loaves of machvad, 10 loaves of marcheshet, 10 loaves of rikikim, 10 loaves of chalot. Then you're going to have to bring another 9 offerings. Why 9 offerings? All to fulfill your obligation for, maybe I said, a combo. Because a combo can come in various forms. Okay, we said half-half, that's 1. So maybe I said half-half, and then you have to bring half rikikim, half chalot, 5 and 5. But maybe you meant 6 and 4. Or, right, 6 rikikim, 4 chalot. Maybe you did 4 and 6. 4 rikikim, 6 chalot. So we're going to go 5 and 5 maybe, 6 and 4 or 4 and 6. Maybe 3 and 7 or 7 and 3. Maybe 8 and 2 or 2 and 8. Maybe 1 and 9 and 9 and 1. Now that's going to get you to 9 possibilities. So that's why they say, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says only 10 loaves, you're still going to have 9 extra possibilities. If you say 12 loaves, you're going to have more, because you're going to have to do 1 and 11, okay, and then all those numbers. So basically, we're saying it can't possibly be Rabbi Shimon, because you'll have to do 14. So what could the other answer be? Well, I told you there's 2 answers. Abai Amar, afilu tema Rabbi Shimon, Sham'in alei Rabbi Shimon de Amar maite umatne. He says, what do you mean? You could be Rabbi Shimon. You could bring 5 types. Solet, machvat, marcheshet, and the 2 mafet tanur, rikikim, the 2 in the oven, rikikim and chalot. And then, what are you going to do? You're going to make a stipulation and say, listen, I have 10 loaves of rikikim, I have 10 loaves of chalot. Now, either I said all rikikim, or I said all chalot, or I said some combination of the 2. So now I'm bringing 10 of each. And I'm going to say the following. If I said only rikikim, then these are the rikikim are my obligation, the rest are voluntary. If I said all chalot, the chalot are my obligation, the rest are voluntary. If I said 1 rikik and 9 chalot, then the 1 rikik and the 9 chalot are my obligation, and the rest are optional. And then, right? So basically what you're going to say is you're going to bring it and say, my stipulation is whatever among this batch, right, which could have been the solar one, it could have been the machvat, it could have been the marcheshet, but if it's it could have been the rikikim only, it could have been the chalot only, but if it's the combination, then whichever one's here that was supposed to be for my obligation will go to my obligation. So I don't need to bring more than 5. That's what Abaye says. How do we know that he says? Now he says, Shamin alei, we know that Rabbi Shimon holds you can make these stipulations. How do we know that? Tanya, there's a brayta that says, Rabbi Shimon Omer. Now we're talking about someone who they're not sure if they're a leper or not. So how do you bring the korban asham of the leper, which is supposed to come with a log of oil? Okay, so now the question is, how do we do that? Rabbi Shimon says, L'mochorat mevi ashamo, right after he goes through the beginning process of trying to get pure, even though we're not sure, it's all safek, but right, otherwise you're going to be stuck, and especially once you do all the other processes, you can go back into the community, but you can't go to the temple. So to get out of it, this is on the 8th day of his purification process, going now to Amud Bet. He brings his asham, he brings his log with that. And he says the following: if I'm a mitzorah, zehu ashamo v'zehu logo. This is the asham, this is the log. Ve'in lav, and if not, asham zeh yehi shalmei nedava. Okay, then the asham will count as a shlamim, a voluntary shlamim offering. V'oto asham. Now you have to have the chumras of everything here. So it's going to need shchita b'tzafon. It's going to be slaughtered in the north. It's going to be matan behonot. You have to put the blood from it on the ear and the finger and the toe of the leper, because those things are all relevant for asham. Because remember, asham is kachim kachim. It needs shchita in the north. It needs the matan behonot. That's special for the asham mitzorah. It needs smicha nisachim, which nifat chazev shog, which are unique laws for the shlamim. To smicha, you bring the libations with it, and you wave the breast and the thigh. But back to asham, it's eaten only by male kohanim. If it's a shlamim, it gets eaten by the owners, and it gets eaten for that day and the night, not the next day. If it was shlamim, it could be eaten the next day, but this one can't be. Now, even though they asked this question, okay, and we had this question and this question actually came up earlier in the. Where did this come up, this sugya? I assume it was in Zvachim. Okay, and we definitely had it. Okay, I'm not sure where, but anyway. Now, the whole reason why we allow you to do this, because usually we don't allow you to do this. What's the problem? The problem is you can't create a situation. We never really want you to create a situation where this might be shlamim, But yet, we're going to say you can only eat it for a day and a night, because if you leave it over till the next morning, you're going to burn it. And then you're taking kachim that maybe your shlamim actually could be eaten today, and you're going to make them get burnt. So really, okay, when Rabbi Shimon says you could do this lechatchila, it's only in this case because it's litikune gavra, because it's fixing a person. This is very serious. This isn't like just someone wants to get some atonement. But this leper can't eat unless they do this korban, so we want to give them a way out to fix the person. Aval ba'alma di'evidin lechatchila lo. Now, if you want to say, but maybe Rabbi Shimon wouldn't really allow this in general, and then that won't help us for our mincha case. We're going to say you can't do this. You can't make this stipulation. But wait, the mincha is different than this case, because Hani Mile, when the Gemara asked that question and answered it and said, listen, this whole thing is only because we're fixing the person, but we're not going to allow this in general, like in an ideal situation. Well, the real issue there, where we're not going to allow this lechatchila in other situations that are only allowing it here because it's fixing the person, is because it's creating this problem with the shlamim that we're going to burn them before they need to be burned, possibly. Because you're going to end up bringing sacrificial items and destroy them and ruin them because they're no tar left over. Aval menachot, but menachot, there is no such issue. There's no difference between the menachot in terms of the time you can eat them. They're all the same. You're not actually ruining anything. So you have nothing to lose, and therefore afilu lechatchila. So comes Abaye, a very long-winded statement, but he basically says, the fact that we see Rabbi Shimon allows you to make a stipulation there, must be you can do it in the menachot as well. And even though there was the tikkun gavra, here there's nothing to lose. There's no high stakes at all. So we're going to let you do it no matter what. Okay, so machloket whether this, machloket whether this case in the Mishnah that Yuvi Chamishtan, Rabbi Yirmiyah says it's not Rabbi Shimon, and Abai explains how it could fit with Rabbi Shimon as well. Because according to Rabbi Shimon, you would make a stipulation. According to Tanakama, you wouldn't need any stipulation because there is no such thing as half rikikim, half chalot. However, Rav Papa is going to ask a slew of questions now. We're going to see two of them today, and we'll see more tomorrow. Amalei Rav Papa la Abai. So he says to Abai, Ula Rabbi Shimon de Amal mechza chalot mechza rikikim yavi. Well, if you want to say, okay, we're going to have some practical problems. You're going to say you could bring half chalot, half rikikim, and you're going to say that you can bring 10 and 10 and just say, oh yeah, however I said it, it'll just work out, right? Half part of it will be my obligation, the other part will be my voluntary. It seems to be a problem because instead of what you're supposed to do for a mincha, you're supposed to take 1 isaron of flour, of solet, and 1 isaron of oil, and 1 log of oil. And that's what you're supposed to take. Now, in this case, what happens? You, in the end, your obligatory offering is going to be made up of 1 isaron and 1 log, but it's not because you took 1 isaron and 1 log. In the end, if it was the chalot and rikikim mixed together, you have 2 esronim, 1 you took for rikikim, 1 you took for chalot, 2 login, 1 you took for of oil, 1 you took for rikikim, 1 you took for chalot, and now you're basically saying, I'm using an isaron from both of them. And the Gemara seems to think that that's a problem. Shouldn't really be able to do that because you're supposed to do 1 isaron with 1 log, and you're basically pulling out 1 isaron and 1 log from 2. Okay, and that's not right. To which they say, no, it's not a problem. Shamiran le'el Rabbi Shimon damar imevi isaron echad mishnei esronot v'log echad mishnei lugin yatsa. Okay, they said we have a tradition, or we heard that Rabbi Shimon holds it. That's totally fine. If maybe not ideal, but if you did it, it works. So we're going to allow that to go here. Second question, and with this we'll finish for today. Umikmat hechi chametz. But how do you do the kmitza? Because what you're doing is basically you're going to take 1 kometz of the rikikim on the rikikim, 1 kometz of the chalot on the chalot, and now you're basically taking a kometz, possibly, right? Because we don't know, maybe half the rikikim are obligatory, half are optional, half the voluntary. Same thing with the chalot. You're taking a kometz on basically the kometz from the rikik on half the rikikim, right? On rikikim which are chova and optional, obligatory and optional, and you're not really taking it on what you're supposed to be taking it on, because the kometz from the rakik, let's say, is supposed to be on the combination of the two. Right, like theoretically, you should put the doughs together. If you're doing half and half, you can put the doughs together and take a kometz from the mixture. But that's not what you're doing here, because maybe it's all rikikim, maybe it's all chalot. You're trying to keep all your options open, but in keeping all your options open, you're not really doing it the way it's supposed to be done. So, demane v'amal, no, he makes a stipulation and he says, if I said either all the chalot, or maybe I said only rikikim, then the kometz on the chalot for the chalot, or and then rikikim lahave rikikim, right? And the one I did on the rikikim are for the rikikim. And again, either one is optional and one is obligatory. And but if I said part and part, when I took the kometz of the chalot will be on half of it, the half of the rikikim and the chalot that are obligatory, and dekakamitzna mirikikim lehave amechza rikikim v'amechza chalot, and the one I took from the rikikim will be on the other half, the optional part of whichever chalot and rikikim I said. To which the Gemara asks, "V'ha," we'll go just a little farther into tomorrow's daf. V'ha bai mikmatz chad kometz mechalot umirikikim. But don't we really need to take a kometz from a combination of the chalot and the rikikim, like we said before, for it to work? So again, they're going to answer, Sham'ina leila Rabbi Shimon. We have a tradition that Rabbi Shimon Da'amal, he says, Im kamatz v'ala b'yado me'achad al shnehem yatsa. Ideally, you should have the kometz from both. But if you took from one of them on the combo of them, it works. Okay? And with that, we finished those questions. We're going to have another one coming up. So we reviewed the end part about the end part of yesterday's daf, the machloket Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan. From then we moved on to what Rabbi Yehuda meant when he said it's the miuchad. That's why you use the solet when you weren't clear about which one. You go with solet. Okay, when you didn't specify anyone, you just said mincha. So we have you do solet. And what does it mean? It's miuchadesh menachot. We thought it meant one thing. We changed it and said that was really just a mnemonic. Then we went to the mincha, min ha-mincha, and from there Rav Papa said, what about minei mincha? We had 2 attempts to try to answer the question, but ended up with really a lack of clarity. And then we moved on to this, I specified, but I don't know what I specified. You have to bring 5, and then we said, oh, that's not Rabbi Shimon, that's what Rabbi Yirmiyah said. And then, basically, Abai said, no, it is Rabbi Shimon, and then we've had a whole bunch of questions on that, right? He made a stipulation, right? He says you could do that. We brought a source. That wasn't even a question. That was just we brought a source to prove that you could say so, and kind of brought up a question within it and said, well, if you want to say, though, that was a unique case and it's not really allowed anywhere else, but no, it would be allowed in Menachot because there's really nothing to lose, right? Like there is in the Shlamim Asham case. And then we moved to the to say, well, right, Rav Papa asked Abaye, and Abaye always had answers, but he said a few questions of how do you do in one Yissaron from 2 Esronim and 1 Log from 2 Logim? Apparently, Rabbi Shimon doesn't have a problem. How do you do the Knitza in this case? Because you're not really taking from the Rikikim on the ones you're supposed, right? You should really be taking Rikikim and Chalot together, a kometz from a combo, and you're not doing that. But seems like B'di'evet, Rabbi Shimon thinks that's okay. And we'll continue on and see what other issues they have. And with that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day and a Shavua Tov.